The one thing that I want you to know, I was that daughter at home, waiting for my mom to come home.
May God have mercy on your pathetic soul, because the rest of us who know the truth about you won't.
You are a loser, you're a coward, you are nobody, you're an animal.
Gary Ridgway, infamously known as the Green River Killer, stands as one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Confessing to the murders of at least 71 women, he was officially convicted of 49 counts of murder, a grim record that shocked the nation. His victims, primarily sex workers and vulnerable young women, were strangled and dumped in remote locations, often near the Green River in Washington state. For nearly 2 decades, law enforcement struggled to identify him, until advancements in DNA profiling finally led to his arrest in 2001. But what drove this seemingly unremarkable man to commit such unspeakable horrors? This documentary delves into the dark and twisted mind of Gary Ridgway, from his troubled childhood to his reign of terror and eventual capture.
Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was the second of 3 sons in a troubled household. His father, a bus driver, frequently expressed disdain for sex workers, a sentiment that likely influenced young Gary. His mother, Mary, was described as overbearing and had a volatile temper, often engaging in heated arguments with his father. The home environment was filled with tension and control, which left a lasting psychological impact on Ridgway. Ridgway struggled in school, where he was diagnosed with dyslexia and had a low IQ in the low 80s. He repeated a grade and was often teased by his classmates, further deepening his feelings of isolation. Despite his academic struggles, he managed to graduate from Tyee High School in 1969. However, his difficulties in comprehension and communication contributed to his social alienation, making it difficult for him to form lasting friendships or relationships. As an adolescent, Ridgway exhibited disturbing behaviors, including cruelty to animals and violent tendencies. At the age of 16, he lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him in the liver. Miraculously, the boy survived, but Ridgway showed little remorse. This act of violence was an early sign of his sadistic inclinations, but it was largely overlooked by authorities and those around him. After high school, Ridgway enlisted in the United States Navy and was deployed to Vietnam, serving aboard a supply ship. During his time in the military, he frequently visited sex workers, contracting gonorrhea but continuing to engage in unprotected intercourse. His conflicting feelings of sexual desire and deep-seated hatred toward women, especially sex workers, began to manifest more intensely during this period. His first marriage, to high school girlfriend Claudia Craig Barrows, ended in divorce after just 2 years. Ridgway's subsequent relationships were also fraught with turmoil, largely due to his controlling nature and insatiable sexual appetite. His second wife, Marcia Lorene Brown, later reported that he would demand sex multiple times a day and pressure her into public sexual encounters. He also attempted to exert religious control over her, frequently reading the Bible aloud and insisting on strict adherence to his beliefs. Despite his outward religious fervor, Ridgway continued to solicit sex workers, reinforcing his contradictory duality of moral righteousness and predatory behavior. His deep-seated resentment toward women who engaged in sex work, coupled with his violent tendencies, set the stage for what would become one of the most notorious killing sprees in American history. In the early 1980s, Ridgway worked as a truck painter at the Kenworth Truck Factory in Renton, Washington. The job provided him with financial stability and a routine, allowing him to blend into society as an unremarkable blue-collar worker. His ability to maintain a seemingly normal life while harboring dark and sadistic urges, would later perplex investigators. Ridgway's third marriage to Judith Mawson in 1988 brought a temporary decrease in his killings. Mawson later stated that she believed she had saved lives by being his wife, as he appeared to become more stable during their relationship. However, he resumed his murderous activities, albeit at a reduced rate, demonstrating that his compulsions were deeply ingrained. Throughout his adult life, Ridgway honed his ability to manipulate and deceive those around him. He appeared friendly, yet his relationships were riddled with control and secrecy. Those closest to him had no idea that behind his seemingly mundane exterior, he was harboring a monstrous secret. His preference for young, vulnerable women, particularly sex workers and runaways, stemmed from his belief that their disappearances would go unnoticed. He used deception to lure his victims, often showing them pictures of his son to create a false sense of security. By the early 1980s, bodies of young women began appearing near the Green River in Washington state. Investigators suspected a serial killer was at large, but they had no idea that Ridgway, the quiet factory worker, was the one responsible. His ability to evade capture for nearly 2 decades made him one of the most elusive serial killers in history. While suspicions about Ridgway emerged early in the investigation, law enforcement lacked sufficient evidence to connect him to the murders. His calm demeanor and cooperative nature during interviews helped him avoid serious scrutiny. It would take advancements in DNA technology years later to finally bring his reign of terror to an end. Between 1982 and 1998, Gary Ridgway committed a staggering number of murders, targeting young women along Washington's Pacific Highway South. His victims were often sex workers or runaways, chosen because they were vulnerable and less likely to be reported missing immediately. He perfected a pattern of gaining their trust before brutally strangling them, either manually or with ligatures such as belts or ropes. His first confirmed victim, Wendy Lee Caulfield, was discovered in July 1982, her body dumped in the Green River. Over the next few months, the bodies of 4 more women surfaced in the same area, prompting the formation of the Green River Task Force. Investigators, including renowned FBI profiler John Douglas and serial killer Ted Bundy, contributed to the case, speculating that the killer was revisiting his victims' bodies to engage in necrophilia. Ridgway was initially questioned in 1983 after the boyfriend of a missing woman identified his truck. Although he passed a polygraph test, investigators remained suspicious. However, with limited forensic capabilities at the time, they could not link him to the murders, allowing him to continue his killing spree for nearly 2 more decades. His method was disturbingly consistent. After engaging in sexual activity with his victims, he would strangle them from behind, sometimes looking into their eyes as he took their last breath. Once dead, he would discard their bodies in wooded areas or remote locations, often posing them in disturbing ways. Ridgway deliberately scattered the bodies to confuse investigators, occasionally moving remains between sites to mislead the task force. He also planted misleading evidence, such as cigarette butts and chewing gum from other people, in an attempt to throw off forensic experts. Despite being married to Judith Mawson, Ridgway continued to kill. However, he later claimed that his murder rate decreased while he was with her, suggesting that his relationship provided a temporary outlet for his violent urges. Even so, the killings did not stop entirely. By the late 1990s, forensic science had advanced significantly. Investigators revisited old evidence and found a breakthrough semen samples collected from victims matched Ridgway's DNA in 2001. Authorities arrested him as he left the Kenworth truck factory. The quiet man who had lived a double life was finally unmasked. Facing overwhelming evidence, Ridgway agreed to a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. He confessed to 49 murders, but claimed to have killed as many as 71 women. His chilling statements revealed a man who killed not out of necessity, but out of a deep-seated hatred and a desire for control. During his sentencing in 2003, Ridgway remained emotionless as the families of his victims confronted him. He was sentenced to 49 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Despite his confessions, authorities suspect he may have killed even more women, and some of his victims' remains have never been recovered. He is currently incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary, where he spends his days in solitary confinement. The Green River Killer's legacy is one of horror, leaving behind a trail of shattered families and unanswered questions. Even decades later, the full extent of his crimes remains uncertain. The case of Gary Ridgway serves as a haunting reminder of the depths of human depravity. His ability to blend into society while committing unspeakable acts highlights the dangers of underestimating those who appear ordinary. Though justice has been served, the scars left by his reign of terror will never fully heal.
All right, so today we're diving into one of the most unsettling cases in American history, Gary Ridgway.
The Green River Killer.
The Green River Killer, exactly. And we're gonna, try to get a grasp on how a seemingly ordinary man, right?
Okay.
Could become one of the most prolific serial killers this country has ever seen.
Absolutely.
And, you shared some pretty fascinating source material, excerpts from his life, details of the crimes, the story of his capture. It's a very complex story.
Yeah.
And, the question that I think really jumps out for me at the beginning is just how did he manage to evade capture for so long?
That's the question that haunted investigators for years and years. And to answer that, we really need to kind of look at all of the factors that shaped him.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one thing. It was kind of this perfect storm of, personality traits, life experiences, and opportunity.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. We have to start with his childhood, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like it was
troubled.
Troubled, far from idyllic for sure.
A volatile home environment.
Yeah.
A father who openly despised sex workers.
Yeah.
And a mother prone to these fits of rage.
Oh, wow.
It was a recipe for instability.
Yeah.
And for young Gary, already struggling with dyslexia, a low IQ, this created a breeding ground for feelings of inadequacy and resentment.
Well, it almost makes you wonder if those feelings, that sense of inadequacy, that fueled his rage later on.
I think it's a very compelling theory.
Yeah.
Imagine, a young boy constantly feeling intellectually inferior, bullied, ostracized, and then you layer on top of that this warped perception of women that stems from his father's blatant disdain for sex workers. It's not a far leap to see how those early experiences could kind of fester.
Yeah.
Manifest in horrifying ways later on.
And there were even some early warning signs, weren't there?
Right.
I read about this disturbing incident where he stabbed a 6-year-old boy.
Exactly. And then his documented cruelty to animals.
Oh, right.
Another classic, red flag.
Yeah, for sure.
It's heartbreaking to think about those missed opportunities for intervention. What's striking is that these early signs often point to this deep-seated lack of empathy,
Right.
and a disturbing fascination with control,
Yeah.
which are really the hallmarks of his later crimes.
It's chilling. And then we jump ahead to his time in the Navy.
Right.
And it's like, here's this guy, serving his country, but also engaging in some pretty risky behavior.
Right.
Hey.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
He contracts gonorrhea during this time, yet he continues to have unprotected sexual encounters.
So there's a clear pattern of impulsivity there.
Yeah, disregard for consequences.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you have this, this intense religious devotion, right?
Yeah.
But then this escalating patronage of sex workers.
Right. It's almost paradoxical.
It's almost paradoxical.
Yeah.
Right?
It really is.
It's like...
It is that duality, that internal conflict is crucial to understanding Ridgway. He seems to be grappling with his own desires, right?
Yeah.
He's clinging to this strict moral code.
Right.
But he's simultaneously violating it in the most extreme way.
Right.
And this internal struggle, it seems to become even more pronounced during his 3 marriages.
Right.
None of which were successful.
Right. And his second wife, Marcia, she paints a particularly unsettling picture. She talks about his constant demands for sex, pressure for these public encounters, and attempts to control her through religion.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It's terrifying, and it's almost like a preview of the control he would later exert over his victims.
You're right to pick up on that connection. His failed relationships.
Yeah.
They seem to reinforce this need for dominance.
The dominance.
This desire to exert power over women.
Yeah.
Particularly the context of sex.
So we see this dark pattern emerging,
right?
This undercurrent of violence and control.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the surface, he's living this seemingly normal life, like stable job, right? Truck painter, routine, blending in with everybody else. It's almost unbelievable.
It is. That's one of the most disturbing aspects of this case, wouldn't you say?
It is. It's like
that he was able to maintain this facade of normalcy while committing these heinous acts. It speaks to this level of compartmentalization and deception that is both fascinating and frightening.
Absolutely.
He was a master manipulator, able to present a completely different persona
like
to the outside world.
Yeah, like 2 completely separate lives. Yeah, and each carefully concealed from the other.
Absolutely.
And then in the early 1980s, the Green River killings begin.
Yes.
Young women, many of them sex workers or runaways, start disappearing.
It was a terrifying time in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Ridgway preyed on the vulnerable, those on the margins of society.
Right.
Whose disappearances were less likely to raise alarms.
And the way he went about it was so calculated, like gaining their trust, often by showing them pictures of his son.
I know.
And then strangling them, and then carefully disposing of their bodies to confuse the investigation.
Ugh, that detail about the photos is so chilling, It speaks to his cunning, right? And his ability to manipulate his victims.
Totally.
Creating this false sense of security before striking. But his calculated approach wasn't just about the act itself, right? It was about, evading capture.
Right.
He chose these remote dumping grounds.
Yeah, often near the Green River.
Often near the Green River, right?
It's the name.
Hence, the moniker we know him by.
Right.
And he revisited some of these sites,
really
repositioning bodies.
To throw off investigators, throw them off.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier how investigators were just initially baffled.
They were.
He even passed a polygraph test.
Right. In 1983.
1983.
And not only did he pass.
Right.
But he had the audacity to plant misleading evidence.
Like really?
To further deflect suspicion.
Wow.
It was a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
And for a long time, Ridgway was winning.
It's incredible to think that he was able to keep this up for so long, just living this double life, evading detection.
Yeah.
But eventually, science caught up with him, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
By the late 1990s, DNA technology had advanced significantly.
Yeah.
Investigators began re-examining old evidence. And in 2001, they got a hit.
Wow.
DNA samples from several crime scenes
Wow.
matched Gary Ridgway.
That must have been a game changer for the investigation.
It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for.
Yeah.
Finally, they had the irrefutable evidence they needed
Right.
to arrest him. Imagine the relief, but also the weight of knowing they finally caught this monster who had terrorized their community for so long.
Yeah. What happened when they finally cornered him?
Well, faced with this overwhelming evidence, he made a deal. He would confess to his crimes in exchange for avoiding the death penalty.
So he admitted to everything.
He confessed to 49 murders.
Wow.
But he claimed to have killed as many as 71 women.
That's just a staggering number.
It's a chilling testament to the scale of his depravity.
And did his confessions offer any insight into his motivations?
They did.
What'd he say?
It wasn't just about sex.
Oh,
he spoke about this deep-seated hatred for women, particularly sex workers, and this twisted need to control and dominate them. He described the murders as a way to get rid of them.
Oh, God.
Almost as if they were a nuisance
McTravie.
that he needed to eliminate.
Oh, it's just pure evil.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the pain and anguish.
It's unimaginable.
Yeah.
During the sentencing, many family members bravely confronted him, pouring out their grief and anger.
I can only imagine.
Ridgway, however, remained largely emotionless.
Wow.
Showing little remorse for the devastation he had caused.
That's a detail that always sticks with me in these cases.
Yeah.
It's the ripples of pain that just extend far beyond.
It's essential to remember that each of those 49 confirmed victims and potentially dozens more were daughters, sisters, mothers.
It's just heartbreaking.
Their lives were tragically cut short, their stories forever intertwined with this monster.
Awful.
And heartbreakingly, some of the victims remain unidentified.
Oh, wow.
To this day.
Gosh.
Leaving their families in a perpetual state of agonizing limbo.
It makes you realize the true cost of these crimes, right? Like you're getting told that statistics can never fully capture.
Yeah, it's more than a number.
Yeah, it's way more.
Yeah.
But then there's also this question of the bigger picture.
Right.
What does a case like this tell us about our society? About the systems that failed to protect these women?
Absolutely.
What can we learn from this horrific chapter in our history?
It's a stark reminder that even in a society as advanced as ours, there are these cracks in the system, these vulnerabilities that predators like Ridgway can exploit.
Right.
A lot of his victims were, marginalized, living on the fringes. Their disappearance is less likely to be prioritized.
Right.
It begs the question, what can we do to better protect those who are most vulnerable?
That's the question, right? I mean, how do we prevent
Right.
another Green River killer?
Right.
Is it about increased awareness? Is it about
I think
better resources for law enforcement?
it's likely a combination of all those factors.
Yeah.
I think we need to be more vigilant, more aware of the signs of predatory behavior and the vulnerabilities that certain populations face.
Right.
Law enforcement needs the resources and training to effectively investigate these complex cases, particularly when the victims are often, overlooked or dismissed.
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to address the root causes of that marginalization.
Yeah.
Tackling issues like poverty, addiction, lack of access to mental health services.
You mentioned earlier, the role of forensic science in finally bringing Ridgway to justice. And it's a reminder that, science and technology can play a crucial role in solving these cases, even decades later.
Absolutely. The advancements in DNA technology were pivotal in this case. In fact, they used a technique called PCR to amplify tiny DNA samples from the crime scenes, right? And this allowed them to match those samples to Ridgway.
Wow.
Something that wouldn't have been possible in the 80s when he was first questioned. It really underscores the importance of continually investing in and refining forensic science.
Absolutely.
It can literally be the key to unlocking the truth
Right.
and holding perpetrators accountable.
And it also highlights the dedication of these investigators who never gave up on this case, even when it seemed hopeless.
That's right. Their persistence, their refusal to let these women be forgotten, it's truly commendable.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even with the advancements in forensic science
Right.
and the dedication of law enforcement, there's another crucial aspect that we haven't really touched on.
Okay.
And that's the role of the community.
Okay.
We need to foster an environment where people feel empowered to come forward with information.
Right.
Where victims are not afraid to speak out.
Right.
And where there's this collective sense of responsibility for each other's safety.
That sense of community, that looking out for one another, I mean, that can be incredibly powerful.
It's about creating a safety net.
Yeah.
Especially for those who might otherwise slip through the cracks.
And part of that is changing the narrative, right? Around certain types of victims.
Yes.
For too long, crimes against sex workers and runaways have been minimized or even dismissed.
Dismiss it.
And we need to recognize that, every victim deserves justice.
Every victim.
Regardless of their background or their circumstances.
Regardless.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth, dignity of every individual, and acknowledging that every life lost leaves this gaping hole in our community.
It does.
As we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this mix of emotions, sadness for the victims and their families, a sense of relief that Ridgway was finally brought to justice,
right? But
also just this renewed determination to learn from this horrific case.
I think that's an appropriate response.
Yeah.
It's important to acknowledge the complexity of those emotions, the weight of this case. We can't shy away from the darkness.
Right.
But we can use it to fuel positive change.
Right.
Yeah. By understanding the factors that contributed to these tragedies, by supporting the work of organizations that, fight for justice and advocate for vulnerable populations, we can hopefully contribute to a future where such horrors are less likely to occur.
So for anyone listening who wants to kind of explore this case further, what resources would you recommend?
Well, there's some excellent books and documentaries available.
Okay.
Green River Running Red by Ann Rule provides a very detailed account of the investigation. For a more psychological perspective, I'd recommend The Mind of a Killer by Robert Ressler.
Okay.
One of the FBI's first profilers.
Wow.
He actually interviewed Ridgway extensively, offering some fascinating insights into the mind of a serial killer.
Yeah.
And then Chasing the Devil by Sheriff Dave Reichert, who was instrumental in catching Ridgway, is a gripping read. That takes you inside the investigation.
Okay, yeah.
And then, of course, there are, many documentaries that offer different perspectives on the case.
It's important to remember that, engaging with this material can be emotionally challenging.
It can be tough.
So, practice self-care.
Absolutely.
And seek support if needed.
Of course.
This deep dive has been a harrowing journey.
It has.
But I think it's been a valuable one. We've delved into the life and crimes of Gary Ridgway.
Yeah.
We've explored the factors that shaped him. We've examined the impact on his victims and their families.
Wow.
And most importantly, we've discussed what we can learn from this case to help prevent future tragedies.
We can't undo the past.
Right.
But we can strive to create a better future.
Absolutely.
Let this case be a reminder of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and a commitment to justice for all.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,
Yes.
and most importantly, stay safe.
What did you want to do to her?
What did I want to do with her? Just to have her stop and...
But how would you
again-
do it? What did you think in your head about how you would do it? That's what we're trying to get at. When did you first think about treating your mom violently to get what you wanted her to do?
Probably in 4th grade.
Okay, there we go. Fourth,
The 5th and the 6th was probably up to that grade.
and what was in your mind that you wanted to do to get her to treat you a certain way? What did you want to do to your mom here?
I wanted her to stop being angry at me for not knowing how to...
But she wasn't stopping,
No, she wasn't stopping.
was she?
No.
She kept picking at you, belittling you, embarrassing you. I mean, that was pretty clear from yesterday. What was your way of retaliating against her in your mind? What were you thinking to do to your mom?
I don't know if I was thinking of hurting her. I just wanted her to stop and let me alone. Angry at her for pushing and pushing and pushing on me to remember, and I just couldn't remember, and I just wanted her to stop.
But she didn't.
But she didn't know.
She didn't stop. So somewhere in the 4th or 5th grade, that sense of helplessness that you had not being able to get her to stop would very likely have produced thoughts of taking back some power and control over your mom to get the bitch to shut up. I mean, I'm sorry, but Gary, that's what we hear, and that's what one of the things we're looking to get a better understanding of.
During that thing, I usually took it out on other things instead of hurting her. Living things, killing animals.
Okay.
Killing animals. I stabbed a kid one time.
Okay.
Stabbed a kid with a knife.
Tell me about that.
It was down by Chinook, where I used to go to school. And boy was playing. I stabbed him in the side and didn't kill him. And I think it must have been about 6th grade, I think it was 7th grade. And that was at the same time I was breaking out windows, throwing rocks at windows at school.
Not interested in that.
But that's what I took my aggression on. I couldn't take it on my mom. I had to take it on my animals and
How many
the
animals
kids.
did you kill?
I killed a lot of birds, but one cat suffocated in an ice chest, and shot babies at dogs to hurt them, and threw rocks at my brother about that time. I think I was getting out of that, though.
You couldn't take your aggressions out on your mom,
No, I couldn't.
but you could think about it.
I could think about it, and
What'd you think?
I thought about hurting her, so she'd shut up and leave me alone, and then
How did you think about hurting your mom?
killing her.
And how would you do that?
I thought with my hands, or I didn't have no guns or anything, so I didn't. It had to have been hands or.
And then after she was dead, what were you going to do in your head?
In my head, I don't know what I would do. I just wanted her to stop. One time they were going to put me in a special school. I didn't want that. My dad and my mom were arguing about it all the time. And it was for retarded people, and I wasn't retarded, I don't think. So I was mad at them for wanting to put me away from other kids. And wanting to hurt her. And hurt her bad.
What does that mean? Hurt her bad? Help me to understand that.
Just beat her up so she would leave me alone. And
how would you do that in your head?
My hands. Beat her up with my hands. Maybe use a knife.
What would you do with the knife?
I'd probably stab her with it. She was the big problem I had. I mean, my dad wasn't around that much. He was working all the time, and she was the only one that was in control, and she was constantly trying to get me to do better in school, and I just couldn't do better. I wanted to have her stop, and the only way was to kill her, to hurt her bad.
Help me understand the knife.
Well, the knives are in the drawer. That would be, I used a knife on that, stabbed that boy, and I could use a knife on her if I wanted to. It's a way of killing, and
Ridgway shows no emotion while speaking of his violent actions, not even about his mother, even though speaking about her should trigger some level of anger. It's almost if he has separated himself from his emotions and is speaking as a distant observer.
Okay, walk me through what you were going to do with the knife in your head to your mother.
cut her throat so she wouldn't stop degrading me and putting me in. I couldn't remember things, and that was the only way I could think of hurting her to get her to stop.
When did you think about having sex with your mother?
When 14 or 15, I think.
Tell me about that. It's about the same time frame.
Mm-hmm. I'd see her out sunbathing, and I feel that she'd be good to have sex with, but she's my mother, and I never really. This is the only woman in my life, other than neighborhood girls, but I get fantasies of having sex with her and wanting to, but being restricted on that part.
Explain to me fantasies and restricted on that part. Your
Well,
words.
because if she's my mother, it's not right for having sex with your mother. And she was always in two pieces, and she'd come off work, she'd go in the backyard, so it was inviting to fantasize with her. She was there sunbathing and tan, and it was something that really intrigued me. It's all women like this. They're different, and it roused me to. I get a hard on sometimes, and it was the only time I had an opposite sex. In class, everybody's clothed and stuff like that. This was a woman that was sometimes, laying down with no bra on. I mean, you couldn't see anything but bare skin, and it was a turn on in a way, and I enjoyed looking out the window at her when she wasn't watching.
Did your mom enjoy that?
She didn't even know I was there. No, she was down just sunbathing, and then she'd turn over, and before she turned over, she always fastened her bra and turned over, and maybe a little bit up here to show because she no tan marks. And I stared and looked out all the time.
And had your fantasies?
I had a fantasy, yes.
It makes sense to me. Makes sense that you would have a fantasy. Need to have you tell me what that was.
Just a fantasy of wanting to have sex, touch her, feel her body, have her show me how to have sex. Because mothers teach you a lot of things, It's just a fantasy. It's something she wouldn't do it, but it's.
What would, in your fantasy, what would your mom have you do to her?
Have me do to her. My fantasy would be to explore, to find the different things what a woman has, girls have that guys don't have. Show me how to have sex, good sex. What the woman wants, and feel every bit of her body to enjoy a woman and have sex with her.
But at the same time in your life, and listen carefully to this, at the same time in your life, you also hate your mom for what she's doing to you.
Yes.
So how are those thoughts and fantasies colliding together? Because we know that happens. How are they colliding together in your head?
And colliding together in my head when she was just laying down there, she was more of a sex object than a mother, and more of the fantasies of having sex with her and nothing of having to kill her. It was two different things. When she was always Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, when she's down there, she's a sex fantasy, sex object. When she's up there trying to get me to read, and she's the other side of something I hated. I loved the part of her being a sex object, but I didn't like the part of her being a mother and working with me, is trying to help me in reading, and I liked the sex part better than I liked the mother that was always trying to hurt, belittle me, and because I wasn't. didn't really think I had a urge to kill her. I just wanted her to stop. And
What did you want to do to her?
what did I want to do with her? Just to have her stop and let me alone. Angry at her for pushing on me to remember, and I just couldn't remember, and I just wanted her to stop.
But she didn't.
But she didn't know.
She didn't stop. But how would you do it? What did you think in your head about how you would do it? That's what we're trying to get at. When did you first think about treating your mom violently to get what you wanted her to do?
Probably in 4th grade.
Okay, there we go. Fourth,
the 5th and the 6th was probably up to that grade.
and what was in your mind that you wanted to do to get her to treat you a certain way? What did you want to do to your mom here?
I wanted her to stop being angry at me for not knowing how to...
But she wasn't stopping.
No, she wasn't stopping.
Was she?
No.
She kept picking at you.
She kept
belittling you, embarrassing you. I mean, that was pretty clear from yesterday.
It happened in school, too, so I had...
So what was your way of retaliating against her in your mind? What were you thinking to do to your mom?
I don't know if I was thinking of hurting her. I just wanted her to stop and